Picture a room the size of a church. Now fill it with fire. Not one fire. 6. Open hearths cut into stone walls blackened by decades of smoke. A cast iron range that's been burning since before your grandfather was born. A spitjack grinding and turning in the heat with a mechanical persistence that doesn't care what time of day it is. Copper pots the size of small children hanging from iron hooks above your head. Steam that turns the air into something you don't breathe so much as swallow. Grease on every surface. The floor, the walls, the ceiling, the back of your neck, the inside of your nostrils. Add in a woman screaming at someone that the bechamel is breaking. A boy running across a floor slick with fat while carrying a pot of boiling stock that weighs almost as much as he does. The metallic smell of blood from a haunch of venison being trimmed at the far end of the preparation table, and a rat. A genuinely impressive rat the size of a well-fed cat, moving along the baseboard with the calm confidence of an animal that knows nobody is going to stop what they're doing to chase it right now. That's a ducal kitchen in London in 1762, upstairs, 15 feet above your head and a world away entirely. The Duke of Marlfield is sitting down to dinner with his guests. 43 of them tonight, 8 removes, 6 entrees, 2 soups, 1 clear, 1 thick, fricassee of rabbit, roasted saddle of mutton, braised carp from the estate pond in Wiltshire, a pyramid of syllabub that took the pastry cook 3 hours to assemble and will take about 4 minutes to eat, and a dessert table at the far end of the room built over the course of this entire day from pulled sugar and marzipan and icing and fresh fruit arranged just so that the Duke's guests will glance at and then ignore because they are already full from the 9 other things they ate before reaching it. Turtle soup, by the way. That's the first course upstairs. Real turtle. A green sea turtle, live when it arrived, dead for about 6 hours now. The shell is sitting in the corner of the scullery. Someone will use it to scrub a pot later. Turtle soup in 1762 costs more than your family earns in 2 months. You haven't eaten since yesterday morning, and you have 7 more hours of work before anyone gives you anything. I make these history stories, and honestly, I'm never entirely sure if people sleep to them or if they just lie awake in the dark thinking about how bad things smelled before soap was widely available. Either way, you've found the right channel. Tonight we're going below stairs. Not just below stairs, but all the way down into the deepest, hottest, loudest part of a great London townhouse. The kitchen. The place that made everything upstairs possible, and that nobody upstairs ever thought about at all, and that you've been living in for 3 weeks now, and that has already aged you in ways you cannot quite name. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your name is Thomas Wick. You're 15 years old, and you've been in London since the 14th of September, which makes it 22 days now, though there have been stretches of those 22 days where time moved so strangely, either stretched thin with exhaustion or compressed into nothing by sheer relentless work, that you couldn't have told anyone with confidence how long you'd been here. You arrived from Hertfordshire with a letter of recommendation from the vicar, a bundle of clothes wrapped in a cloth that smelled of your mother's kitchen, and the conviction, not yet tested, not yet broken, not yet replaced with something more accurate, that London would be loud but manageable, that a kitchen position in a great house was honest work, that honest work rewarded the person who did it. You know better now, not all of it. You're only 22 days in, but enough. It's 4:30 in the morning, and you are already working. You've been working since 3:30, which is when Mrs. Beale, the cook, appeared at the door of the under kitchen with a candle and a face that required no expression to communicate exactly what was expected of you. Mrs. Beale communicates almost entirely without words. A look means get up. A glance at the copper means it needs polishing. A silence where a compliment might have been means you have done adequately and may continue doing so. In 22 days, she has said your name once. The fire needs to be lit before anything else. This is your job. Yours and no one else's, at least until you've been here long enough to have someone below you to hand it off to. You light the fires, the main kitchen hearth, which takes 2 armloads of coal and 30 minutes of careful coaxing before it will hold reliably. The smaller prep fire in the side kitchen, which is easier. The range, which is harder. The range has a temperament. It has been known to refuse to draw properly for entire days at a time, filling the kitchen with smoke instead of heat, making Mrs. Beale's expression go from merely severe to something closer to geological. You've learned to approach the range the way you'd approach an uncertain dog, slowly, consistently, without showing fear. The coal lives in the coal hole, which is outside the kitchen in a small stone room that collects the damp from the foundations. You carry it in a scuttle, 2 scuttles for the main hearth, 1 for the prep fire. The scuttle weighs, when full, somewhere between everything and slightly more than you can comfortably carry. The coal dust gets into your hands, into the creases of your knuckles, into the corners of your eyes. By 6 in the morning you look like someone has rubbed charcoal across half your face. By evening, it's all of your face. By the time you go to bed, you have stopped noticing. The cold in the kitchen at this hour is extraordinary. The building holds the night's chill in its stone walls with the same efficiency that it will hold the day's heat later on. Your breath comes out in little clouds as you kneel at the main hearth, arranging the kindling the way old Tom showed you. Newspaper twisted into a point, then the smallest chips of wood crossways, then slightly larger, then coal on top. Not too much, never too much at the start or you'll smother it. The newspaper catches, the wood catches, the coal for once does what it's supposed to do. You stand up, your knees ache. They've ached since about day 4. You're 15 years old and your knees ache, which tells you something about this work that no one bothered to put in a letter. The kitchen begins to warm. Not warm the way a room is warm. Warm the way a furnace is warm. The thing about a kitchen with 6 fires, a roasting range, 3 ovens built into the walls, and 43 people upstairs who want dinner, is that the warmth is not comfortable. It's not the warmth you come in out of the cold to find. It's the warmth that makes you sweat through your clothes by 8 in the morning and keeps you sweating until midnight. And then, when you finally fall into your cot in the basement room you share with 2 other boys, you lie there damp and exhausted and too hot to sleep quickly, even though you're so tired that your vision sometimes goes soft at the edges. You get used to it. Old Tom says you get used to it. Tom has been in this kitchen for 27 years. He has the complexion of a man who has stood next to fire for 27 years, which is to say he looks like cured leather, reddish-brown and deeply lined, with eyes that have narrowed permanently against decades of smoke. He is not a warm man exactly, but he has told you things, small things, useful things, where the spare kindling is kept, which of the kitchen maids will cover for you if you're 5 minutes slow on an errand, and which one will mention it to Mrs. Beale immediately, how to carry a full coal scuttle without it swinging and hitting your knee, when to speak and when to be invisible. The trick in a kitchen like this, Tom said to you on your second day, not quite looking at you, sweeping the hearth with the efficiency of someone who has done it 10,000 times, is to understand that you're part of the building, not a person, a part of the building. The building needs certain things to run. You provide them. The building doesn't think about you any more than it thinks about the plumbing. He paused, considered this. Less, actually. They think about the plumbing when it fails. You weren't sure if this was wisdom or warning or simply description. Possibly all three. By 4:30, the main hearth is burning steadily. The range is drawing. The prep fire is lit. You fill the largest copper pot from the water pump. The pump is outside in the yard, and the water at this hour is so cold it makes your teeth ache, and you set it on the range to heat. This water will be used for washing pots. It will be used to blanch vegetables. It will be used to make stock, though the stock has been on since last night and doesn't need this particular water. But Mrs. Beale believes in having water hot and available at all times, and so you provide water hot and available at all times. The pump handle is cold iron, and after 3 trips with the copper pot, your palms are red, and your fingers are starting to go slightly numb in that particular way they have at this hour of the morning. Not quite painful, but not quite feeling properly like yours either. You flex them against your apron, which is already grey-brown with the day's first work and the day's not yet fully started. The aprons in this kitchen are something. You were given 2 when you arrived. They were white once, in what must have been a previous geological era. They are now the colour of things that happened in a kitchen, which is to say they're brown and grey and faintly green in places, and occasionally a dark reddish brown that you've learned not to look at too carefully. You wash them on Sundays, in cold water in the stone sink, and they are slightly less brown by Monday morning, and brown again by Monday afternoon. This is the cycle of aprons. You have stopped thinking about it. The kitchen is starting to fill. Mary comes in at 5. She's the first kitchen maid, which means she's been here longest and has the most authority among the maids and does the most skilled kitchen work. She's 23, from somewhere in Norfolk, and she moves through this kitchen the way water moves through a channel, following the grooves worn by long practice, quick and efficient, and with no wasted motion. She notices you've got the fires lit and the water on, and she nods once. This is, you've come to understand, the equivalent of high praise from Mary. Peg comes in at 5:15. Peg is the second kitchen maid, 17, from London itself, which she mentions fairly often, and which seems to give her a sense of superiority over you that you have decided is not worth challenging. Peg is chatty, which in this kitchen is unusual enough to be remarkable. She talks while she works, a low continuous murmur about the house and the people in it, about what happened in the servants' hall yesterday, about what she heard one of the footmen say about one of the other footmen, about the quality of the butter that came in this week compared to last week's butter, about everything and nothing. The monologue of someone who uses words the way other people use silence, as a kind of protection. You've learned to half listen to Peg, not to respond mostly, because if you start responding she will talk at you specifically for the rest of the day. But the information in her talk is sometimes useful. You knew about the dinner party tonight before Mrs. Beale announced it because Peg mentioned it 2 days ago in her running commentary on the events of the house. 43 guests, she said. The Duke is trying to impress someone. Then nothing more, because Mrs. Beale walked through and Peg's voice shut off like a candle going out. Mrs. Beale comes in at 5:30, which is later than everyone else. But this is not lateness. This is authority. The kitchen begins at 5:30 because that's when Mrs. Beale arrives. Everything before that is simply preparation for the kitchen to begin. You're not, before 5:30, working. You're getting ready to work. She is not a large woman. She's not the sort of cook you might imagine if you were imagining cooks based on pictures in books. Not round, not jolly, not pink-cheeked. She's perhaps 50, spare and upright, with grey-brown hair pulled back under her cap and hands that are remarkable. Large for her frame, roughened at the knuckles, permanently slightly reddened from heat and water, with a steadiness to them that speaks of 30 years of work with fire and blades and hot metal. She could, you believe, cut a julienne of anything in any condition, in any lighting, while simultaneously watching every other person in this kitchen with the peripheral attention of someone who has learned that kitchens will betray you the moment your attention wanders. She surveys the kitchen. She surveys you, Tom, Mary, Peg, and the kitchen boy named Will, who appeared at some point you didn't quite track. A small 10-year-old whose job is to turn the spit when the spit jack fails, which it does more often than anyone discusses. She looks at the fires, at the water, at the state of the pot rack, at the prep table, at the floor, which you swept before lighting the fires, and will need sweeping again in approximately 20 minutes. The venison came, she says. It's not a question. It's in the cold room. Someone needs to assess it before I plan the menu properly. The delivery said Tuesday, but I don't trust Tuesday deliveries from that man. He has a flexible relationship with Tuesday. She looks at Mary. Mary nods. Then she looks at you. Water. You go for more water. This is, you've come to understand, almost everything that is required of you right now. Water and fire and clean surfaces and the ability to carry heavy things from one part of the kitchen to another without dropping them, spilling them, burning yourself significantly enough to be unable to work, or being in the wrong place when someone more important than you needs to be in the right place. This is the job, not glamorous, not skilled, not yet, but essential in the way that foundations are essential, in the way that the walls between rooms are essential, invisible, load-bearing, not thought about until they fail. Your predecessor in this position, you've gathered from fragments of conversation you're not quite meant to hear, lasted 11 days. Left in the night, apparently. Did not give notice. Mrs. Beale's expression when someone mentioned this, the one time it came up, was not one you could read as anything other than professional disappointment in the concept of quitting. You think about this sometimes, at 3:30 in the morning, when you're lying on your side in the dark basement room with Tom's snoring coming from the next cot, and your hands already aching in anticipation of the day. You haven't left. You're not sure if this means you're tougher than the last boy, or simply slower to recognize when you should go. Let me tell you what you eat today. Let me tell you this first, before we get into everything else, because it's the point, isn't it? It's the centre of the whole story. The Duke of Marlfield will sit down tonight to a dinner that took 18 hours of continuous labour to produce. 18 hours of your labour and Mary's labour and Tom's and Peg's and Mrs. Beale's, and the labour of the undercook Mr. Sims who arrives at 6, and the pastry cook Miss Partridge who has been here since 4 and will still be working at midnight, and Will the spit boy, and the kitchen porters who arrive at intervals through the day to carry things and move things and take things up the back stairs, and the footman who will serve what this kitchen produces, and the butler Mr. Harrow, who oversees all of it with the detached authority of a general who has not himself held a sword in many years. The Duke of Marlfield will eat turtle soup, made from a live turtle that arrived yesterday and cost 6 shillings and 4pence. He will eat a fricassee of rabbit in a cream sauce with morel mushrooms that came here from France this week, and cost more per pound than good beef. He will eat a remove of roasted saddle of mutton from the estate in Wiltshire, The lamb, you are told, is fed on particular grasses that give the meat a particular sweetness, though whether the Duke or his guests will notice this amid the claret and the conversation is something no one in this kitchen is in a position to comment on. He will eat braised carp in a sauce built on 3 days of concentrated fish stock, rounding through multiple reductions until it coats a spoon the way lacquer coats wood. He will eat a second soup, a clear consommé clarified with egg whites until it runs perfectly transparent. That took Mary 4 hours and is, in your limited experience of things, genuinely extraordinary. Golden and clean and smelling of something you can't quite name. Something rich and animal and deep. The distilled essence of what bones become when you treat them with enough patience and heat. He will eat dishes whose names you're only beginning to learn. Blanc de volaille, soubise, matelote, ragout, navarin. Words that come from somewhere you're not, that describe preparations you are only beginning to understand, that exist in a register of food entirely separate from anything that was ever cooked in your mother's kitchen or eaten at your father's table. And what will you eat? Today, because of the dinner, because 43 people are coming, and every resource of this kitchen is committed to their experience, and none is committed to yours, you will eat the following. At 5:30, when Mary cuts the bread for breakfast, you will have 2 slices of bread spread with dripping. The dripping is from yesterday's roast, collected in the pan, clarified slightly by cooling, so the fat sits on top of the meat juices. It is salty. It is deeply, substantially flavoured with the memory of whatever animal it came from. It is not glamorous in any description of the word, but it is warm and immediate and fills the particular hollow that opening your body up for a day of work creates, and you eat it standing at the edge of the prep table because there is no time to sit, and the taste of it, the richness of it, the salt of it, the way the fat smooths across the cold bread, is one of the things you've come to look forward to the way you used to look forward to Sunday supper back home. That's breakfast. At noon, if there is a noon, which on dinner party days is uncertain, you will have a bowl of the servant's broth. This is a different thing from the broth being made for upstairs. Upstairs broth is a careful, constructed thing. The servant's broth is what remains when the careful construction has extracted everything worth extracting from the bones and vegetables used to build the good stock. It is still warm. It is still nourishing in the way that things are nourishing when they have been made from ingredients that were once good. It is thin. It tastes of effort more than flavour. The flavour having gone upstairs hours ago. On good days there is bread with the broth. On dinner party days the bread is being used for something else. In the evening, after service, after the last dish has gone up and come back down and been scraped and washed, and the kitchen is in a state of post-battle devastation that must be addressed before you can sleep, you will eat what remains. The remains tonight will be more than usual, because dinner parties always produce remains. Dishes that were partially eaten. Sauce left in the pan that wasn't sent upstairs because Mrs. Beale decided at the last minute it was not quite right. Bread from the kitchen. Whatever the servants' hall had for their supper, which will be a different dinner from what went upstairs. Simpler, plainer, existing at a different level of the food hierarchy that governs this house as strictly as any other hierarchy. You will eat standing, because the chairs in the kitchen are not for scullions. You will eat quickly, because there is still cleaning to do. You will eat whatever is in front of you, because after 17 hours of work, the concept of preference is not something your body has resources to maintain. And upstairs, at roughly this same hour, The Duke of Marlfield will be pushing back from his table with the satisfied looseness of a man who has dined extremely well, and he will lead his guests through to the drawing room for coffee, and the kind of conversation that exists when you don't have to worry about where your next meal is coming from, and he will not think about the kitchen. He will not think about you. He will not think about the 18 hours of labour below his feet. Why would he? That's not what kitchens are for in his world. Kitchens are for producing food. People are not the point. You know this. You knew it before you arrived. In the abstract way you knew things before they were true. You know it differently now. But here's the thing, and this is what I want you to stay with. The thing that keeps pulling at you as you work, the thing that makes this more than just a sad story about a hungry boy in a hot room. You're learning something down here, something that nobody upstairs knows, something you can't learn from books or tutors or sitting at table being served. You are learning how things are actually made. You are learning what food actually costs, not in money, but in time and skill and physical endurance and the particular knowledge that lives in a cook's hands and nowhere else. You're learning a craft from the bottom in the way that crafts can only be learned, badly and painfully at first, and then less badly, and then slowly, with a kind of confidence that doesn't announce itself, but simply becomes part of how you move through a room. Right now, at 15, with your hands already starting to carry the first calluses of what will eventually become the thick-skinned competence of kitchen work, you don't know that yet. Right now, you know that the fires need feeding and there is more water to fetch. So let's go back to the beginning of the day and live it properly. The kitchen in the Marlfield townhouse on Grosvenor Square in October of 1762 occupies the entire basement level of the east wing of the house. It is not one room but several. The main kitchen, with its great fireplace and range, the scullery where the washing is done, the larder and cold room built into the north side of the building, where the cold from the street seeps through the stone and keeps things at the temperature that meat requires. The pastry kitchen where Miss Partridge works with the focused intensity of someone who considers pastry a moral project. The still room where preserves and beverages not requiring the main kitchen are produced. And the coal hole, and the wood store, and the servants' hall where the upper servants eat and the lower servants eat, and everyone eats at a table that corresponds precisely to their place, in a hierarchy that is no less rigid for being unwritten. The main kitchen is perhaps 30 feet long and 20 feet wide. The ceiling is low enough that old Tom, who is not a tall man, habitually ducks when passing under the pot rack, though the rack is a good 6 inches above his head. The habit is the result of years of learning caution when surrounded by things that can hurt you, and the caution has become reflex. The ceiling is black. It has been black for as long as anyone in this house has been alive, coated with the accumulated exhalations of every fire lit, and every pot boiled, and every roasting joint turned on the spit since the house was built in 1720. The walls are stone, whitewashed at some point, but the whitewash has become part of the general darkness, and the floor is flagstone, smooth and cold and slightly treacherous near the range where fat has dripped and been cleaned and dripped again in a cycle that leaves a permanent faint slickness that everyone navigates by memory. The windows are small and set high in the wall, street level, so that if you press your face to the glass you can see the feet of people passing on the pavement above. On busy mornings you sometimes watch the feet, leather shoes, heeled, the shuffling gait of someone who's been walking since dawn. Boots, patterns, the wooden platform shoes women wear over their shoes to lift them above the mud, which clatter on the pavement with a specific sound that you've already come to associate with the time before the house properly wakes. There is, in those feet, a whole world of people going about their lives that you're not part of, not right now, not for the next 17 hours. At 6 in the morning, Mr. Sims arrives. Mr. Sims is the undercook, which in any normal kitchen would mean he is the cook's assistant. In this kitchen, under Mrs. Beale, the term assistant sits uneasily. What Mr. Sims does is handle a specific portfolio of preparations: the roasting, the heavy braising, the stocks that require sustained attention over many hours, while Mrs. Beale handles everything else and maintains an overview of the entire operation that you have come to think of as something between military command and religious observance. Mr. Sims is 35, competent, a little afraid of Mrs. Beale, and possessed of a quality of steadiness that you will eventually understand is one of the most valuable things a cook can have. He doesn't panic, not even today, not even with 43 people coming, not even when the delivery from the fishmonger arrives 40 minutes late, and 2 of the fish in it are not acceptable and have to be sent back and replacements sourced. He doesn't panic, and because he doesn't panic, Mary doesn't panic, and because Mary doesn't panic, Peg doesn't panic, and because none of the people who know what they're doing panic, the people who don't know what they're doing, you, primarily, are given a stable platform on which to be confused and overwhelmed and exhausted without the confusion tipping into crisis. You will understand this later, the value of steadiness, how it radiates outward from a person and holds a room together. Right now, you just know that Mr. Sims has arrived and the pace of the morning is about to shift. "Wick," he says, not looking up from the apron he's tying. He always gets your name right, which marks him as distinct from approximately half the household. "Sir, the stock pot needs skimming, and the larder needs an inventory before Mrs. Beale reviews the menu. You go to skim the stock pot. The stock pot has been going since yesterday afternoon. It is a copper pot the size of a small cauldron, set on the back of the range where the heat is low and steady, and it contains the bones of several chickens, 2 knuckles of veal, an entire bundle of herbs tied with string, an onion browned in fat before going in, 2 leeks, 3 carrots, and water. Lots of water. The water has been doing what water does when you give it heat and time and good things to extract from. It has been becoming something else. Something amber-coloured and faintly viscous and smelling of the essence of nourishment. Skimming the stock pot means standing over it with a flat ladle and removing the grey foam that rises to the surface as the proteins in the bones coagulate and float. It is not difficult work. It is hot work, because the pot is at the back of the range, and the range generates the kind of heat that makes the air 6 inches above it shimmer. You stand with your face tilted away from the direct heat and reach with the ladle and skim, and the grey scum accumulates in a bowl beside you, and the stock gradually clears. The smell at this proximity is extraordinary, deep and complex and warm, the kind of smell that makes a part of your brain, some very old, very animal part, respond with something like gratitude, like recognition, like the smell of safety that your body associates with food being prepared in large quantities by someone who knows what they're doing. You skim. The stock clears. Then you go to the larder. The larder is cold, not kitchen cold, which is a relative term, but genuinely cold, the cold of the north-facing stone room with its marble shelves and its perforated tin panels in the windows that let the outside air through, while keeping flies out mostly. The floor in here is always slightly damp, the air tastes of meat and cheese and the particular mineral sharpness of cold stone. On the marble shelf, the haunch of venison, which Mary assessed earlier and pronounced acceptable, which means it has been hanging long enough to develop flavour, but not so long that it has developed anything more than flavour. Next to it, wrapped in cloth, 2 brace of pheasants from the same estate as the venison, already plucked but not yet drawn. 3 rabbits, wild ones from the looks of them. A large piece of beef, a standing rib roast that's destined for the servants' hall dinner tomorrow. The turtle shell you noticed earlier sitting by the door because someone ran out of room. On the middle shelf, dairy. A block of butter the size of a brick, pale yellow salted. 3 large jugs of cream. A pot of soft white cheese. Eggs arranged in a bowl, 2 dozen of them. On the bottom shelf, vegetables waiting for prep, carrots, turnips, a pile of onions, a bunch of celery, 3 varieties of potato, dried herbs in bundles. You write this down on the slate that hangs by the larder door. Mrs. Beale will look at this slate and plan, or adjust her plan, and the plan will become the 43 dinners that go upstairs tonight. All of it starts here. All of it starts with cold and marble and things that were recently alive. You write it down carefully. Your handwriting is not elegant, but it is legible, which is something the vicar taught you, that legibility matters more than elegance in writing meant to be used. The slate is cold under your fingers. Then you go back to the kitchen, which is now noticeably warmer. The day is beginning. And when I say beginning, I need you to understand what that means on a dinner party day in a house like this. This isn't the beginning of a normal working day. This is the beginning of something closer to a controlled emergency, a carefully choreographed crisis. Every person in this kitchen has a role. Every task has a sequence. Every sequence has a timing. And the whole edifice of timing depends on every component doing what it's supposed to do, when it's supposed to do it. Because a dinner for 43 people is not a meal. It's an architecture. It's a performance with 100 moving parts and no intermission, and an audience upstairs who will notice if something is wrong and never notice if everything is right. The right outcome here is invisibility. Everything going up and nothing going wrong, and no one upstairs ever imagining the basement below their feet. Mrs. Beale reviews the slate from the larder. She reviews the menu she sketched yesterday, looks at the 2 items she's reconsidering given the fishmonger's late arrival, makes a decision that she communicates to Mr. Sims in approximately 4 sentences, and then she's at the prep table with her knives. Her knives are her own. They are not the kitchen's knives, which are kept in a rack by the range and represent a varied collection of different generations of sharpening and replacement. Her knives are hers, kept in a roll of leather that she brings from her room each morning and returns there each evening, and they are magnificent. You know this because on your second morning here, Tom told you, in the way he tells you things, as if he's thinking out loud and you happen to be in the same room, that Mrs. Beale's knives were given to her by the cook she trained under, who got them from the cook she trained under, and that the handles have been replaced twice but the blades are the originals, and have been sharpened so many times over so many years that they are thinner now than when they were made, and consequently sharper than any knife you have ever seen. He was not exaggerating. You have seen what she does with those knives, and it is one of the more quietly astonishing things in your current experience of the world. Today, she's starting on the vegetables, julienne for a garnish. Her hands move in a rhythm that you watch for a moment too long before catching yourself, because there is no time to watch. There is only time to work, but you file it away. That rhythm, the cadence of the knife and the movement of the fingers that curl away from the blade, with the unhurried precision of someone who is never going to cut herself and knows it. Your job right now is pots. The pots in the Marlfield kitchen have been used since 1720. Some of them are original to the house. Copper, mostly, though there is iron and tinned iron and some earthenware that comes out for long braises. Copper is the preferred material for serious cooking because copper conducts heat evenly and responds quickly when you move it on or off the fire, which matters when you're making a sauce, and the difference between perfect and ruined is sometimes a matter of seconds. But copper reacts with certain foods in ways that can make people very ill, so the inside surfaces of the copper pots are lined with tin, and the tin wears away with use and with the abrasive cleaning required to maintain copper pots in the state that Mrs. Beale requires. And when the tin wears away, the pots have to be sent to the tinsmith. And in the meantime, and at all times that not the meantime, the copper on the outside needs to be clean. Clean in this kitchen means mirror bright. You clean pots with a mixture of sand and vinegar and whatever abrasive comes to hand, rubbing in small circles, and the copper does come up eventually to a shine that is genuinely beautiful. Warm reddish gold glowing in the firelight, the colour of something valuable, which it is. These pots representing an investment in the kitchen's functioning that would take you years of wages to replicate. But getting it there takes time and effort, and the vinegar and sand mixture has a smell that gets into the back of your throat, and your arms ache after the first hour of it, and by the end of the morning your hands are slightly raw from the combination of cold water and abrasive. You do it. You do it because it needs doing, and because Mrs. Beale walked past your work yesterday and looked at a pot you'd done and said, very quietly, better, and that word has been sustaining you ever since. Peg materializes at your elbow. 43 tonight, she says, picking up a pot and beginning to dry it after you've finished. Harrow's been in a state since yesterday. You should have seen him at breakfast, going through the plate inventory like he was conducting a military inspection. Counting spoons. He counts spoons every dinner party day. He counts spoons every day. He counts spoons in his sleep, probably. The man is in love with silver. She glances at you sideways, assessing. You know who's coming tonight. You don't know who's coming tonight. You didn't even know there was a dinner party until 2 days ago. Lord and Lady Castleford, she says, lowering her voice to the register she uses when the information is genuinely interesting. And Admiral Brent, and someone from Parliament whose name I forget, but Harrow went pale when he saw it on the list, so he must matter. And, she pauses for effect, the Duke's daughter. You wait. She's been in France, Peg says. 3 years. Everyone downstairs has opinions about France, she considers. I mean, Mrs. Beale learned her sauces from a French cook, so she doesn't say much about it, but the footmen think it's suspicious. The footmen think everything is suspicious. True, Peg dries a pot briskly. The silver, though. You want to know something about silver? You do not want to know something about silver. You want to finish these pots and move on to whatever Mrs. Beale needs next. But Peg has a way of telling you things whether you want to know them or not, and occasionally the things she tells you are genuinely useful. Last time they had a big dinner, she says, 6 spoons went missing. Not just missing. Gone. Harrow blamed the extra footmen hired for the service. But everyone downstairs knows it was... She catches herself, because at this exact moment Mary walks through with a bowl of cream, and the sentence stops, and Peg becomes very focused on her drying. You file this away too. Not because it matters to you directly, but because this house, your understanding, has currents running through it that are not visible on the surface, and learning to read currents is part of surviving in it. Mary comes back without the cream. She stops, looks at the pots you've done so far, picks one up, turns it toward the firelight. "This seam," she says, pointing to where the handle joins the body of the pot. "You're not getting into the seam." She puts the pot down, picks up the cleaning cloth, shows you. Gets into the seam with a focused, pressured motion that you've been avoiding because it requires significantly more effort than the flat surfaces. "It pools there," she says. "Grease and residue. It'll taint the next thing you cook in it." She puts it down, walks away, doesn't ask if you understood. In this kitchen, if you're shown something once, you're expected to have understood it. You go back to the pot, get into the seam. Better. Outside the high windows, London is waking up. You can hear it even from down here. The increasing frequency of feet on the pavement above, the distant rumble of carts and carriages on Grosvenor Square, a vendor calling something you can't quite make out, the sound of a horse being managed with some difficulty somewhere on the street. The city is enormous, and it is going about its business, and its business today, like every day, includes the production and movement of food on a scale that you could not have conceived from Hertfordshire, where the food simply existed in fields and was harvested and eaten by the people who grew it. Here, in London, food comes from everywhere and goes everywhere, and the kitchens of great houses like this one are one small node in a network of supply and preparation and service that stretches from the fishmongers of Billingsgate to the farms of Surrey to the estates of Wiltshire to ships arriving from France and Portugal and the Caribbean with things that have no equivalent in English soil. Turtle soup. You keep coming back to the turtle soup, not with resentment exactly, but with a kind of wonder. A living turtle arrived by ship, sold by a dealer in Cheapside who has half a dozen at any given time, purchased by Mr. Harrow on Mrs. Beale's instructions for 6 shillings and 4pence, and now, as of yesterday afternoon, a dead turtle, its meat cut out and prepared according to a recipe that Mrs. Beale has been refining for years, its shell sitting by the larder door as a reminder that you're in a kitchen where ordinary rules of scale do not entirely apply. You have never eaten turtle. You never will eat turtle, in all likelihood. Not from this kitchen, anyway. Not in this position. The food that comes back down from the dining room after dinner, the broken meats, the partials, the things that weren't quite finished, is redistributed in a hierarchy as precise as the household hierarchy, and by the time it reaches you, the turtle soup will be a residue in the bottom of a tureen that needs washing. This is not bitterness, or not only bitterness, it's simply the way things are arranged. The way things are arranged, by the way, is more complicated than you understood before you came here. You thought, back in Hertfordshire, thinking about what kitchen service in a great house would be like, that the main division was between servants and employers, upstairs and downstairs, the people who lived in the house and the people who ran it. Simple enough. What you found is that the servant world has its own internal hierarchy that is as strictly observed as any social ranking above stairs, and that your position at the bottom of that hierarchy is something you feel continuously and precisely. At the top is Mr. Harrow, the butler, who controls the house's finances and the silver and the cellar and the footmen and the general orchestration of upstairs service. Next to him, in authority, if not quite in precedence, Mrs. Beale, who controls the kitchen and everything that comes out of it. Below them, in descending order, the cook, herself, the undercook, the housekeeper Mrs. Price who runs the non-kitchen domestic staff, the footmen who come under Harrow's authority. the lady's maid who operates somewhere outside the normal hierarchy in her role, attending the Duke's daughter, the kitchen maids, the housemaids, the parlour maids, the laundry maids, and then, at the bottom, the scullion. You, the scullion. The word comes from an old French word for the bowls and vessels used in a kitchen, and that is precisely what you are. The person responsible for the vessels, the pots and pans and plates and dishes, the cleaning of them, the maintenance of them, the carrying of water and fuel needed to clean them, and the surfaces they sit on. You are, in the hierarchy of this house, the functional equivalent of the foundations, essential, load-bearing, and never invited to dinner. The servants' hall has a table that reflects this. Upper servants, Mr. Harrow and Mrs. Beale, and Mrs. Price and Miss Partridge, when she joins them, sit at the top. The footman and lady's maid in the middle. Kitchen maids at the lower end. Tom, who is technically a kitchen porter, and thus without a clearly defined place in the indoor hierarchy, sits wherever there's room, and seems entirely comfortable with this ambiguity, which may be one of the benefits of 27 years in the same position, and you, when you eat in the servants' hall at all, sit at the absolute foot of the table, and this is appropriate, and you have accepted it, and you eat what's put in front of you and say nothing unless spoken to, and watch, because watching is what you have right now, watching and learning. On most days, the servants' hall gets a version of decent food. Plain but substantial. Roast meat, boiled vegetables, bread, small beer. The small beer is important. The water in London is not uniformly safe, and small beer brewed weak enough that children drink it, that everyone drinks it, that it's more or less the default beverage of anyone who isn't drinking ale or wine or gin, is safer and more caloric, and has been a staple of working life in this city for generations. On dinner party days, the servants' hall meal is delayed and simplified, because the kitchen's resources are committed elsewhere. Today the servants' hall will eat supper at 9 instead of the usual 6, and supper will be whatever can be produced without substantially diverting effort from the main event upstairs. Your supper, specifically, will be whatever Mary puts in a bowl for you between scrubbing tasks, which is to say you are not eating by any schedule tonight. You are eating by opportunity. It is now 7 in the morning. The kitchen has fully woken up. The range is at temperature, which you can feel as a wall of heat across the entire south side of the room. The main hearth is burning steadily, and the first spit of the day is being set up by Will, a pair of the pheasants on the iron bar, positioned in front of the fire at the angle that Mr. Sims has marked with a notch on the iron support. Will turn the spit for 2 hours. He is 10 years old and has been doing this since he was 8, and he has the patience for it that children sometimes develop for repetitive tasks when they understand there is no alternative, which is to say, absolute patience. He turns the spit. He watches the birds. He doesn't fidget. You've asked him once what he thinks about while he's doing it, and he looked at you with the expression of someone who's never been asked this question and isn't entirely sure it's meaningful. "The turning," he said. "Miss Partridge, in the pastry kitchen next door, has been working since 4. You can hear her through the wall, the thud and rhythm of pastry being worked, the high clear sound of a bowl being moved across marble, the occasional low word to herself that might be instruction, or might be the kind of talking you do when you're alone and deep in work and the words are just a way of staying present. Miss Partridge is 30, the best pastry cook Mrs. Beale has ever worked with, according to Mary, who said this once and has never mentioned it again, as if complimenting someone who works in the same building felt like a resource she didn't want to spend freely. Miss Partridge makes things that belong to a different category of creation than what the main kitchen produces. Not just food, but structure. Not just taste, but geometry. The croquembouche she built last month for the Duke's birthday, a tower of choux pastry balls filled with cream 3 feet tall, held together with spun sugar, was something that required engineering as much as cooking, an understanding of load and balance and the precise moment when hot sugar goes from workable to set. It came out of the pastry kitchen at 6 in the evening and went upstairs at 9:30, and the sound that came back down the servants' stairs, the collective gasp of the dining room seeing it, travelled through the building like a wave. You heard it down here. She has never looked at you. You find this entirely understandable. At 7:30, Mrs. Beale sends you to the market, not alone. With Mary, which is both a relief and a slight source of anxiety, because Mary moves fast and expects you to keep up, and has a complete absence of patience for people who fall behind in crowds, which you have discovered you are still somewhat prone to doing in London streets that have a volume and intensity that Hertfordshire simply didn't prepare you for. The market they're sending you to is the Oxford Market, which is close enough to Grosvenor Square to be practical, and which sells produce and meat and dairy at prices that even household cooks with reasonable budgets can work with. The specific mission: fresh herbs that were not in yesterday's delivery, and a particular variety of cream that the fishmonger's shop is apparently also able to supply, and which will be needed for the white sauce that's going upstairs tonight. And whatever looks good. That instruction, whatever looks good, is one you've been processing since Mary relayed it. Because whatever looks good requires judgment you're not yet sure you have. The October morning is cold. After the kitchen's heat, the air outside is a physical shock. You feel your face and hands register it as something between relief and pain. The sky above the mews behind Grosvenor Square is the particular grey of London autumn, flat and luminous, the kind of sky that could produce rain at any moment and has probably been considering it since about Tuesday. Mary walks fast as expected. You walk beside her and slightly behind, your basket in one hand, the other tucked under your apron against the cold. The streets between the square and the market are already busy. 8 in the morning, which means the domestic servants of all the great houses on and around Grosvenor Square are on the same errand, and the streets have the particular purposeful bustle of people who are working rather than promenading. Other maids with baskets, a footman in livery doing something that looks administrative, a dairymaid with a yoke across her shoulders, a pail hanging from each end, negotiating a particularly bad patch of pavement near the corner of Duke Street. The pails are enormous, and she carries them with the ease of someone for whom this weight has become part of the body. The smell of the street is many things layered. Coal smoke from every chimney, horizontal and sharp in the cold air. The smell of horses from the mews, that warm organic sweetness that London carried constantly. Baking bread from somewhere to the north, a smell so direct and good that it produces an immediate hollow in your stomach. Underneath everything, the more complicated smell of a city of 500,000 people whose waste removal systems are, to put it carefully, adequate rather than inspired. Mary stops at a vegetable stall, picks up a bunch of tarragon, smells it, puts it down, picks up another, nods. This goes into your basket. Thyme, she says. You find the thyme, and Chervil, if he has it, he doesn't always have it. He has it. You find it. Mary smells the chervil and makes a small noise that might mean satisfied. The market is a covered arcade, partially roofed, with stalls running along both sides and a cold wind that manages to find its way in from every direction simultaneously. The noise is considerable. Vendors calling, customers negotiating, the creak and wheel of delivery carts at the far end, the sound of something being weighed on scales whose chain needs oil. The smell in here is everything at once. Citrus from a fruit stall, the sharp sweetness of root vegetables, the dark smell of mushrooms, earth and must and something faintly animal, the clean cold smell of fish from a stall where a man in an oilskin apron is working through a delivery of mackerel with the kind of practiced speed that means the cold is irrelevant to his hands and has been for years. Mary negotiates everything. You watch and carry. This is also part of learning, not just what to buy, but how to buy it. Mary looks at things. She picks them up. She smells them. She puts them down. She offers prices that are below what the vendor asks and waits. The vendors, who know her, go through the rituals of offence and counter-proposal and eventually arrive at numbers that satisfy both sides. Money changes hands. Things go into your basket. The parsley at the last stall, she says as you leave. Did you notice? It was yellow. Yellow and soft at the bottom. 2 days too old at least. The vendor didn't want you to look close. But the time was fine. The time was fine. Different supplier. You learn who to watch. She glances at you without stopping her pace. Also, you never buy fish from the third stall on the left. The ice they use is harvested from a bad source. I've had 2 deliveries from there that I had to turn back. You store this. How do you know the ice is from a bad source? The fish smell wrong. Not bad exactly, just wrong. There's a difference. She doesn't elaborate on what the difference is, which is, you're beginning to understand how Mary teaches. She tells you there is a difference. She leaves you to find it. You get back to the kitchen at 9. The temperature inside has risen. The main hearth is at full burn. The range is producing a heat shimmer above its surface that turns the air above it slightly wavy, like the air above a road on a very hot day, except it is October, and this heat is entirely artificial, the product of coal burning at a rate that costs money and requires the coal hole to be refilled tomorrow morning. Mrs. Beale takes the herbs, examines them, nods once. You put down the basket and go back to the pots. This is essentially your day. Pots, water, fire maintenance, errands, carrying, cleaning, the repetitive substrate on which everything else in this kitchen is built. Not glamorous, not even interesting for long stretches, but the substrate is what makes everything else possible, and this is the thing you are only beginning to properly understand, that the invisible work is the essential work. Mr. Sims is working on the venison now. He has it on the prep table, a great dark haunch of it, and he's preparing it for the oven with the focused competence of someone who has done this 1,000 times. He's making small incisions in the surface of the meat and pressing slivers of garlic and sprigs of rosemary into them, each one placed with the precision of someone who understands that flavour moves through meat from specific points, and that those points matter. His hands are steady and sure. He doesn't rush. There are 9 hours until dinner service. He doesn't need to rush. "Thomas," he says without looking up. "Sir, the roasting tin, the large one, and bring the dripping from the cold room. The clarified stuff, not the fresh. You get the roasting tin. It is iron, heavy, large enough to hold the haunch with room around it for basting. The handle is worn smooth with years of use and slightly bowed, which means carrying it requires adjustment. You've learned the adjustment. You bring the dripping in a bowl, the clarified kind, pale yellow and firm from the cold room, that will melt over the meat as it cooks and baste it continuously. Mr. Sims looks at the dripping, looks at you. Good. Not the fresh stuff. The clarified, do you know why? The fresh stuff has water in it. And water in a roasting tin does what, you think? Steams. Steams. And steam does what to a roast? Poaches it instead of roasting it. He looks at you for a moment with an expression that isn't quite surprise, but is something adjacent to it. Good. You've been paying attention. He goes back to the venison. But you feel the warmth of that. Not the kitchen's warmth, but the small specific warmth of having been told you've done something right by someone who doesn't say it easily. Old Tom appears at your shoulder. Don't get ahead of yourself, he says, very quietly, with what might be a smile. He said that to me after 3 months. You've been here 3 weeks. Is that bad? Tom considers this with genuine seriousness. No, but don't get ahead of yourself. By 10 o'clock the kitchen is in full production. The venison is in the oven. The stock pot has been strained and clarified, the clear golden broth decanted into a clean pot, the bones and vegetables that gave everything they had set aside in a bin that will later be used for the secondary stock that will become the base of the servants' hall's broth. Nothing is wasted. Not because the household is poor, it emphatically is not, but because waste in a professional kitchen is considered a kind of insult to the craft, and Mrs. Beale's sense of craft is as developed as her sense of hierarchy, which is considerable. Mary is making the bechamel. This is the white sauce that almost came apart at 5:30. You heard Mrs. Beale say the bechamel is breaking, and you understood that this was a crisis, though you weren't yet sure why. Now watching Mary work, you begin to understand. A bechamel is butter and flour cooked together into a roux, then milk added, then cream, then the whole thing worked over heat until it thickens into something smooth and coating and faintly sweet. The problem is heat. Too much, and it scorches. Too little, and it doesn't thicken. Too fast, and it lumps. The sauce has to be watched and worked continuously. A slow, sustained effort that requires precisely the kind of attention that a busy kitchen makes difficult. Mary does it without apparent effort. She's at the stove with a long wooden spoon, stirring in a steady figure of 8, her face slightly turned to the side from the steam, and her eyes are on the sauce but also on everything else in the kitchen simultaneously, because Mary's attention works like that, divided and total at once. You refill her bowl of milk when she needs it. She doesn't ask. You see her look at the bowl, see the level, anticipate. She looks at you, nods. This is, you have decided, your primary measure of progress in this kitchen, the frequency and quality of Mary's nods. At 11, Mrs. Beale calls everyone to the prep table. All 6 of you, herself, Mr. Sims, Mary, Peg, Tom, you. She goes through the menu for tonight, not as a discussion, as a briefing. 8 removes, the venison goes up at 7:30, the braised fish at 8, the rabbits. She glances at Mr. Sims, who nods slightly. Are going in the braise at noon, which means 2 o'clock out, rest, dress, up at 8:30. The soup, this to Mary. The consommé, 6 o'clock straining, 7 o'clock service, which means it needs to be perfect. Not good. Perfect. Mary shows nothing on her face. The white sauce, finish at 5, keep warm, adjust at service if needed. The pheasants are the 3rd remove, which means they need to be up at 7:30 behind the venison. She looks at Will, who straightens slightly. You're off the main spit at noon. The joint for the servants' hall goes on at 2. Don't confuse the timings. Will doesn't move a muscle. Thomas. Her eyes find yours. The copper for the fish sauce needs to be the large oval one, not the round because of the shape of the fish. It needs to be immaculate, not clean. Immaculate. And I want the scullery cleared of last night's work before noon, all of it. Yes, Mrs. Beale. Good. She looks at everyone once more. The Duke's daughter is returning tonight. She's been in France. There will be French dishes requested at table. A pause that carries significant weight. We are not making French dishes. We are making English dishes, prepared correctly, for which this kitchen has a reputation. That reputation is not changing because someone spent 3 years in Paris. Are there questions? There are not questions. Good. Back to work. This is the other thing Mrs. Beale teaches you, not through instruction but through demonstration. That reputation is what a kitchen runs on, not recipes, not ingredients, not even skill, though all of those are necessary. The thing underneath all of it is reputation, the establishment of trust between a kitchen and the people it feeds, built over years of consistent excellence, and maintained by not cutting corners even when cutting corners would be easier, and not changing what works just because someone says something different is fashionable. She has been cooking for this household for 14 years. The Duke before this one hired her. She cooked for his son's wedding. She cooked for his funeral. She is not cooking French dishes because someone's daughter went abroad. You find this, in some way you can't entirely articulate at 15, clarifying. Something about knowing what you are and doing it well. Something about the dignity of that. You go back to the scullery and you work. The scullery is a small stone room off the main kitchen, with a stone sink the width of the room, cold running water. The house has a pump system connected to a cistern on the roof, which is relatively modern and a source of pride, or at least of quiet satisfaction to Mr. Harrow. Shelves for clean things and shelves for dirty things, and the particular sour smell of residual food and soap, and the occasional thing that sat too long before getting cleaned. Last night's work is the residue of the household's everyday dinner, not a dinner party, but the Duke and 2 of his household at a table set for 3, which still produced a volume of dirty vessels that represents several hours of work. Plates, dishes, serving pieces, pots, pans, the strainers and ladles and skimmers and basting spoons and graters and mortars and pestles that a kitchen like this requires to function. You clean them in the hot water from the range. The water you've been heating since before 5 this morning has a purpose, specifically this purpose. With a combination of soap, sand for the worst of the cooked-on residue, and the large brush whose bristles you're slightly afraid of because they are made from some stiff fibre that knows no mercy. The smell of the scullery at this stage of cleaning is genuinely bad. The water goes brown quickly. The fat from the pot sits on the surface of the water and coats everything. You change the water twice in the first hour. Your hands in the hot water, then the cold water to rinse, then the hot water again, go through cycles of thermal shock that by the end of the morning leave them feeling not quite like your hands. The skin on your palms and fingers, already roughening from 3 weeks of this, is slightly red, slightly cracked at the knuckles, where the constant wet-dry cycle has broken down the skin's natural protection. You clean. At the kitchen's edge, visible through the scullery doorway, the preparations continue. You can track the time by the smells, the deep savoury complexity of the venison roasting, which begins around 10 and builds steadily all morning. The brighter, sharper smell of the rabbits being browned at noon before going into their braising liquid. The clean green smell of herbs being washed and chopped. thyme and tarragon and chervil and parsley, enough herbs that the smell fills the kitchen and drifts into the scullery and makes your nose register something that might be countryside, might be summer, might be something entirely different from the stone and grease and ash of the place you're actually standing in. At noon, Peg brings you a bowl. Not the servants' hall noon meal. That's not happening today, as Mrs. Beale predicted. This is the servants' broth, the thin second extraction from the bones, and a piece of bread. You eat standing at the scullery door, looking into the kitchen. The bread is yesterday's, slightly stale, and the broth is thin, and it's hot and salty, and you're very hungry, and it is the best meal in the world in this particular moment, this bowl of thin broth and yesterday's bread eaten standing in a doorway while a great machine works around you. Peg watches you eat for a moment. You know what they're having upstairs tonight, she says. Some of it. 14 courses, well, 8 removes, but the removes each have components, so it's closer to 14 actual dishes. She tilts her head. You know what we're having. Broth. And later, whatever comes back from upstairs that isn't worth the footman's attention. She says this without particular bitterness, which is either equanimity or the product of having accepted this arrangement so long ago that it no longer generates the emotion. There's a cold ham that Mr. Sims is setting aside for the servants' hall, and bread, and later whatever Mary decides to make available. What did you have before you came here? Peg looks surprised by the question. She thinks about it. My mum's cooking, which was, good enough. Never went hungry. She pauses. My dad worked at a brewery. We always had beer. What did she make? Stews, mostly. Porridge in winter, whatever was cheap. Dripping bread, same as you had this morning. She looks at you with a particular expression. You miss home food? I miss eating until I was full, Peg laughs. A real laugh, short and surprised. You'll get used to that too, she says, and takes your bowl back to the kitchen. You go back to the pots. The afternoon opens up differently than the morning. The morning was preparation, the building of foundations, fires, stocks, cleaned equipment, the gradual assembly of ingredients into the first stages of dishes that would not be finished for hours. The afternoon is execution. The kitchen moves faster. The heat is higher, not because more fires are lit, but because all the fires in the range are now working at full capacity, and the stone walls of the basement room have absorbed and are now radiating all that heat back, so that the air itself feels warm before you even approach any heat source. Your shirt is wet, has been wet really since about 9, but now the wetness is becoming its own ambient condition, something to be worked around rather than noticed. Mrs. Beale is at the main prep table, working on the 2 soups simultaneously, moving between them with an economy of motion that seems almost impossible given the complexity of what she's doing. The consommé is on 1 burner, at the barely simmering state that clarification requires. If it boils, it clouds, and clouded consommé has failed, watched with the unblinking attention of someone who cannot afford to let it boil. Beside it, the second soup, a thick cream of vegetable that's going to be served cold in shallow cups, as an alternative for guests who find the turtle soup too rich. Mrs. Beale works both of them, adding things, adjusting, tasting from a spoon, and assessing with an expression that gives nothing away, then adjusting again. You watch this from the scullery doorway for longer than is strictly productive. Wick, Mr. Sims not looking up from the rabbits he's checking. The basting. The venison needs basting. You take the long-handled spoon from the hook by the range and open the oven. The heat that comes out of the oven is something different from the kitchen's general heat. It's focused, directed, a wall of it that hits your face immediately and makes you turn slightly to the side, the way you've been taught, so you're not staring directly into it. The venison is in there, in the large roasting tin with the clarified dripping, and the smell that comes out with the heat is extraordinary. That specific combination of caramelizing protein and fat, and the herbs pressed into the surface, the rosemary and garlic going through their own transformation in the heat, releasing oils that blend with the meat's own juices and become something more complicated and better than any of their individual components. You baste it. Pull the pan forward on the oven rack. Spoon the hot fat from the bottom of the pan over the surface of the meat. Watch the fat sizzle and settle. Push the pan back. Close the oven. Do this every 20 minutes. The oven is in the wall, stone-lined, heated from below by a fire in a chamber that Mr. Sims tends with the same care he gives the spit. Too hot and the outside of the roast burns before the inside is cooked. Not hot enough, and it takes too long and dries out. The temperature is assessed by feel, not with a thermometer, which doesn't yet exist in the form you'll eventually learn about, but by putting your hand into the oven at a specific distance from the back wall and counting how many seconds before it becomes unbearable. 3 seconds, too hot. 15 seconds, perfect for a large roast. 25 seconds, not hot enough, add coal. Mr. Sims showed you this on your first week and you practiced it, and burned your hand twice learning the calibration, and now you can do it. The venison's good, you say. Mr. Sims looks at you. The heat is good for it. He comes over, opens the oven, does the hand test, closes the oven. Yes, he says. Good. He goes back to the rabbits. Old Tom is at the sideboard polishing the copper that you've already cleaned because Tom has 48 years of practice and can get a surface to a finish that yours doesn't quite reach yet and knows this without mentioning it. He polishes in a circular motion, old cloth vinegar, the copper coming up warm and glowing. He works in a silence that seems like his natural state. Not unfriendly, not closed off, just quiet, in the way of someone who has found their accommodation with the world and doesn't need words to maintain it. Tom, you say, because you've been thinking about something. He looks up. The servants' hall meal tonight, you said it's 9 o'clock. 9 or later, depending on when service finishes. And it's just what we talked about, broth and ham, and bread. And there'll be something sweet. Miss Partridge usually sends down something from the pastry kitchen, some off-cut or broken thing. She's decent about that. You think about the 14 dishes being prepared 12 feet above your head. You think about the turtle. Does it bother you, you ask, after 30 years? Old Tom considers this with the same seriousness he brings to everything. He doesn't rush to reassure you or to tell you what you want to hear. No, he says finally, not the way you mean. You're thinking about the food, the gap between what goes up and what stays down. Yes. You get used to the gap. You stop seeing it the way you're seeing it now. He looks at the copper in his hands. What doesn't stop is knowing what good food is, being around it every day. That stays. You develop a palate you'll never be able to satisfy on a scullion's rations. A pause. That can be a kind of suffering if you let it be. Or it can be a kind of education. He looks at you, depending on what you do with it. What do you do with it? I'm still here, he says, and goes back to polishing. Make of that what you will. You make of that what you will. At 3 in the afternoon, the kitchen crosses a threshold. There's a point in the preparation for a large dinner when everything that's been working independently converges, and the kitchen goes from organised complexity to something closer to controlled chaos. It's not one event that causes this. It's the accumulation of everything moving toward the same finish line simultaneously. The venison comes out of the oven to rest. The rabbits come out of their braise. The consommé is finished and transferred to a clean pot for final holding. The pheasants, having been on the spit all morning, are done and need to be dressed. The white sauce needs adjusting. The pastry kitchen is producing smells that indicate something critical is happening with the dessert that Miss Partridge has been building since before dawn. And there are 6 hours until service. In a different kitchen, 6 hours might feel like plenty of time. In this kitchen, it feels like urgency. Mrs. Beale moves from station to station with an efficiency that you now recognize as the product of decades of doing this exact thing. She tastes. She adjusts. She gives instructions in the minimal language of someone who has communicated with the same people for years and trusts them to fill in what isn't said. A single word to Mary about the bechamel. Half a word to Mr. Sims about the venison's resting time. A look at you that means more copper needs polishing, even though it's already clean by any standard you brought here from Hertfordshire. You polish more copper. The pheasants need trussing before they go back to the spit for finishing. Mary does this at the prep table with the quick, practiced movements of someone who has trussed 1,000 birds, fingers working through the jointing of the legs, threading the trussing needle with the speed that makes it look simple. It is not simple. You've been watching how kitchen work actually looks from the inside for 3 weeks now. And one of the things you've learned is the gap between how something appears when someone skilled does it and how it actually is. Everything skilled people do looks easy. That's what skill looks like from outside it. The legs, Wick. She holds up the bird, gesturing. You see how the legs align? You look. You've been watching her do this for 3 weeks, and this is the first time she's directly asked you to look. The joints. You want the legs flat against the body, not sticking out, because sticking out means they cook faster than the breast, and you get the legs done before the breast is ready. She sets the bird down, picks up the needle, and you want the string tight but not cutting. Tight enough to hold, loose enough that it doesn't squeeze. She threads it through, ties it, holds it up. You try. She hands you the second bird. You take it. It's cold and slightly stiff. The weight of it different from what you expected. Not heavy exactly, but dense, with the specific density of something that was recently alive and isn't anymore, a quality of solidity that raw meat has. You try to thread the needle the way she showed you. Your fingers are not as steady as hers. The needle goes in at a slightly wrong angle. The string is a little uneven. Mary watches, says nothing. You get it close. Not right. Close. Again tomorrow, she says, taking it from you. Her fingers work quickly through a correction of your trussing that takes about 10 seconds and produces the result it should have been. Better than yesterday. You've never asked me to do this before. You weren't ready yesterday. You think about this for the rest of the afternoon. The delivery arrives at 4. Extra deliveries on dinner party days are normal, apparently, though nothing about them is simple. This one is from the wine merchant, bringing the bottles of claret and hock and Madeira that will be served upstairs tonight, plus 2 bottles of something Mr. Harrow apparently ordered specifically for the occasion, which he collects from the back door personally and carries to the cellar himself. It also includes a small package for Mrs. Beale from the spice merchant. Nutmeg, ground already to her specifications, and a paper twist of something dark that she opens and smells and nods at and puts away in her personal spice cabinet. Then the extra footmen arrive. On dinner parties, the household's 3 footmen are not sufficient. Harrow hires additional men for the evening, experienced household staff between positions who supplement the regular staff of the service itself. They arrive in their own clothes, change into the household livery in the footman's room, and become, for one evening, part of the Marlfield household with all that implies about the standards expected of them. Their presence changes the character of the kitchen. The kitchen before this felt like a contained world. Everyone in it knew the rules and their place in them, and the hierarchy was clear and comfortable in its clarity. The extra footmen introduce uncertainty. They're not regular staff. They don't know Mrs. Beale's rules, or at least not specifically. They're accustomed to different kitchens with different ways. They drift in looking for information and end up in the way, and Mrs. Beale's expression during their first 30 minutes of presence achieves a particular quality of focused displeasure that you have not seen before. One of them, older, heavy, with the specific competence of someone who has worked good houses for years, reads the situation correctly and immediately positions himself at the kitchen door, ready to take things up to the dining room, out of Mrs. Beale's way. The others follow his lead. Mr. Harrow arrives from the cellar to organise them, and they go, and the kitchen breathes again. Wick. Mrs. Beale, not looking up from the aspic she's been working on. The aspic is for a cold dish that will form part of the dessert presentation. A savoury jelly flavoured with wine and herbs, completely clear, set in a mould. Getting aspic clear requires the same clarification process as the consommé, and it requires perfect temperature control in the cooling. Mrs. Beale. The oval copper for the fish sauce, get it. You get it. You cleaned it this morning twice because she said immaculate. You present it. She looks at it, holds it up to the light from the window. Clean it again. You take it back. It is, to your eye, immaculate. But her eye has 32 years in it, and yours has 3 weeks, so you take it back and you clean it again, getting into the seam the way Mary showed you, getting into the junction between handle and body where residue pools. You use more vinegar this time. You rub harder. You hold it up to the same light she used. You can see the difference. You clean it again. When you bring it back, she takes it, holds it up, looks at it for 2 seconds. Good, she says. You return to the scullery slightly lighter than when you left it. At 5, the kitchen goes quiet. Not actually quiet, not silent. There's still the crack of the fires, the sound of things simmering, the movement of people, the distant work of Miss Partridge in the pastry room. But something shifts in the ambient sound of the place, the kind of shift that means people are moving into a different mode. Less talking, more concentration. The particular silence of skilled people executing things they've prepared for. Mary finishes the bechamel. She tastes it from a spoon, tilts her head, adds something, a pinch of something white that you recognise as salt, though she does it so quickly and so instinctively that it seems like part of the sauce itself, and tastes again. Nods. Mrs. Beale comes and takes a taste. A pause that you learn to read over time, the pause of someone consulting an internal library of what this should taste like and comparing it to what it does. Good, she says to Mary. 1 word. Mary's expression doesn't change, but something in her posture does. Some small release of tension that you only notice because you've been watching her long enough to know what her tension looks like. Mr. Sims is dressing the pheasants. Dressed in this context means positioned for presentation. Laid out on the serving platters with the garnish Mrs. Beale has specified, the fried breadcrumbs and watercress, and the sauce demi-glace that has been reduced from the pheasant's own cooking juices and enriched with butter in a final step that produces something so dark and glossy it looks like lacquer. He works with tweezers for the final details of the garnish. the kind of precision you'd associate with jeweler's work rather than cooking. The smell of the kitchen right now is complex beyond any single description. All the cooking happening simultaneously, all the smells overlapping, venison and pheasant and rabbit and the fish sauce beginning on the range and the sweet richness of the pastry from next door and the herbs, always the herbs, and underneath everything the wood smoke and coal smoke and the faint mineral smell of hot stone. This smell, you realise, this specific combination, is becoming a smell you will associate for the rest of your life with something. Not luxury, not hardship, with working. With the thing that happens when people who know what they're doing are doing it, at the edge of their ability all at once. You don't have words for it yet. You're 15, but it's going in. At 5:30, Mrs. Beale makes a discovery. The braised fish. The braised fish is supposed to be, by now, in its final holding state, in the poaching liquid just off the heat, ready to be lifted and dressed for service. The fish came in this morning from the fishmonger, late, and 2 pieces were sent back. The remaining fish, 3 large pieces of carp, went into the braising pan at 1 o'clock with the liquid that will become their sauce. What Mrs. Beale discovers at 5:30 is that the braising liquid is wrong. Not wrong in a way that makes anyone sick, not wrong in a way that means starting over, but wrong in the way that she can see and taste and immediately identify. The seasoning is off. Something in the reduction has gone slightly bitter. Possibly a piece of the court bouillon vegetables was past its best and has given the whole thing an edge that it should not have. This is not fixable by simple addition. You know this because you can see it in Mrs. Beale's face, which has gone entirely still in a way that is different from its ordinary stillness. A deeper stillness. A stillness that processes. Peg sees it, moves to the far end of the prep table and becomes very focused on her vegetables. Tom sees it, goes to check the spit, which doesn't need checking. Will sees it, goes completely motionless, like a small animal in the presence of something uncertain. You see it. Continue washing the bowl in your hands with complete concentration. Mary sees it, stays exactly where she is and waits. Mrs. Beale tastes the liquid again, sets the spoon down, tastes the fish itself, a small piece from the edge, sets the fork down. 20 seconds of absolute kitchen silence, beneath which the fires of the range continue their indifferent work. Mary, she says. Her voice is entirely normal. The white wine, the open bottle from this morning. Mary brings it. Tom, fresh herbs, whatever's left from this morning's prep, the tarragon specifically. Tom gets the herbs. Mrs. Beale begins to adjust. Not to fix exactly. You'll understand this later, that what she's doing is a technique rather than a correction. But to bring the sauce to a different place than it was going, one that accommodates the bitterness rather than fighting it. More acidity from the wine, more aromatic top notes from the herbs, added late so they stay bright. A small piece of butter worked in at the end to soften everything. She tastes it. The kitchen waits. Better, she says. Different, but better. The crisis passes. You let out a breath you hadn't realised you were holding. Later, much later, you will think about this moment. Not because of the fish, but because of what came after it. The lack of drama. The way she identified the problem, considered it, solved it, and moved on. All in under 2 minutes, with no blame assigned and no crisis declared, and no suggestion that anything other than the ordinary business of cooking had occurred. Problems appear. You address them. You continue. You'll carry this forward for years. For the rest of the afternoon the kitchen runs. really runs. The kind of running that happens when everything's working and everyone knows what they're doing and the timing is right and the food is behaving the way food should. You move through it as the substrate, the support layer, the person carrying things and cleaning things and filling the coal scuttle and refilling the water and being in the right place at the right time, and you understand, for the first time clearly, that your role is not the bottom of the kitchen's hierarchy because it's the least important. It's the bottom because it's the foundation, and foundations must be strong and constant and reliable and absolutely cannot fail. If you don't keep the fires fed, Mrs. Beale's sauce has no heat. If you don't keep the water hot, Mary can't do the final blanching on the vegetables. If you don't have clean pots available at each stage of each preparation, every dish has to wait. You're not the cook. But the cook cannot cook without you. You carry this thought. At 6:30, Mr. Harrow appears at the kitchen door. He is in his full evening dress, which marks a different register of authority than his daytime presentation. The long waistcoat, the silver buckles, the powdered wig for a formal dinner, though he wears the wig slightly impatiently, the way someone wears a thing required by their position, rather than chosen by their preference. He is 50, precise, with the quality of someone who has organised large events for 30 years and has refined his anxiety about them into something that looks like calm. He and Mrs. Beale exchange looks, not words, just the look of two professionals who have executed large dinners together many times and have developed the specific communication system of long mutual experience. She nods once. He nods back. The information exchanged. We're ready. Are you ready? The timing is as follows. Anything I should know? No. Good. We proceed. Mr. Harrow retreats back up the stairs. Service begins at 7. And when I say service begins, I need you to understand what happens to the kitchen. The prep time is over. The development time is over. Everything that could be prepared in advance has been prepared. What remains now is the execution, the final production of dishes that have to go from this kitchen to that table in the correct state, at the correct temperature, in the correct sequence, within a timing structure that is determined by the rhythm of the dining room above and communicated downstairs by the footman system and Mr. Harrow's control of the service and the signal that comes through the speaking tube installed in the wall near the kitchen door. Yes, speaking tube. A long pipe that runs from the kitchen to the butler's pantry 2 floors above, through which voice can travel with surprising clarity, and through which Mr. Harrow's voice travels now, at 7 exactly, saying 2 words. First course. And the kitchen moves, not chaotically, the opposite of chaos, with the focused urgency of people executing a plan they know well, moving through a space they know intimately, doing work they have been preparing for since before 5 this morning. Mrs. Beale is at the range, the fish sauce in the oval copper that you cleaned 3 times. The clarified butter is in a small pan beside it. Her hands are in constant motion, tasting, adjusting, the long spoon working the reduction down to exactly the consistency she's been aiming for since this morning, the point where it coats the back of the spoon in a specific way, where running your finger through the coating leaves a line that holds its edges cleanly. Mary lifts the fish from its poaching liquid, precisely, with flat spoons, getting under the flesh without breaking it, which would end its social career. The fish is carefully laid on the serving dish. Mrs. Beale's sauce goes over it in a thin, even coat, finished with a thread of butter that Mr. Sims stirs in at the last second, watching it emulsify with the focus of someone who knows that rushed butter will break a sauce. Tom carries the dish to the door, where a footman takes it. It goes up. This happens 14 times over the next 3 hours. You're washing pots as fast as you can. This is the scullion's version of service. While the kitchen produces upward, you produce clean surfaces and clean vessels, because finished dishes require clean pots for the next thing, and the next thing is always coming, and there is never a moment in service when waiting is an option. The stack of used pots accumulates with a speed that seems at first impossible to keep pace with, but you do keep pace, because you've been trained for it since day one, and because there is no alternative. Your arms ache, your back aches. The hot water and cold rinse cycle has advanced the state of your hands from roughened to something more actively uncomfortable. A rawness at the knuckle joints that flares when you press too hard against the wire brush, and that you've been ignoring for 2 hours. The smell of the scullery is the smell of the dinner, conducted in retrospect. The residue of each course in the pots that held it, the cream of the bechamel, the caramelized richness of the venison dripping, the winey depth of the rabbit braising liquid, the clean herbal brightness of the pheasant cooking juices. You are, in a very real sense, experiencing the meal one remove behind its consumption. You are cleaning the memory of it while the thing itself is happening above your head. Through the walls and floors of the house very faintly comes the sound of the dinner. Not clearly, the building is thick stone and well built, and formal dinners are not the noisiest events. But as a presence, a general resonance of 43 people eating and talking, the occasional lift of laughter, the sound of a door opening somewhere above and the brief clarity of voices and music from the room beyond, then silence again. At 9, Peg brings you a piece of bread. Not a bowl, not broth, just a piece of bread, dark and dense with a scraping of the salted butter from the larder. She hands it to you over the edge of the scullery with no ceremony. Thought you might need it, she says, and goes back to the kitchen. You eat it in 4 bites over the sink, and it is good. It is astonishingly good. Not because it's good bread, though it is decent bread. It's good because it is hot in your stomach in the specific way that food is hot when you're this hungry, and have been working this hard, and the salt of the butter is exactly what your body needed, and the density of it has an immediacy and weight that all the dishes going upstairs, for all their cream and wine and French technique, cannot quite match at this particular moment for your particular body. You go back to the pots. At 10:15, Mr. Harrow's voice comes through the speaking tube one more time. That's service. The kitchen exhales. It's not a dramatic thing. No one cheers. No one stops working exactly. But the specific quality of the work changes from the focused urgency of service to the different, slightly looser urgency of clearing up. Pots can be washed in a more orderly sequence. The fires can be allowed to bank down slightly. Mr. Sims sits on a stool at the prep table for the first time since before 7 and doesn't immediately get up. Mary is checking the state of the kitchen with the same continuous attention she brings to everything, moving through it and cataloguing what needs doing and in what order. You watch her from the scullery door. Wick! She catches you watching. The copper rack. Everything on it needs to come down and go through the scullery. I'll get started on the main prep table. You start on the copper. The dishes that went upstairs have come back down, carried by the footmen who are now in various states of post-service, some of them helping with the clearing, some of them already in the servants' hall waiting for their own supper. The dishes come back in various states. The consommé tureen still warm, with perhaps a quarter of the soup remaining. The pheasant platter, the birds eaten down to bone, the venison half eaten, the carved face of it dark and caramelized, the rest of the joint intact, the fish mostly consumed, with a small amount of sauce remaining in a pool at the bottom of the dish. This remaining food doesn't go to waste. The system for it is clear. The half-eaten venison, the good half, the carved side, will be sent to the servants' hall as the upper servants' late supper. It will arrive at the top of the servants' hall table as a matter of hierarchical priority, going to Mr. Harrow and Mrs. Beale first, then to Mary and the footman, down the table in order of precedence. What remains after that? The ends, the bones with their last attached scraps of meat, the fish sauce scraped from the bottom of the copper, goes to the kitchen staff. You, essentially. You and Tom and Peg and Will, who has been awake since 4 a.m. and is now asleep in his chair in the corner of the kitchen, one hand still loosely holding the cloth he was using to clean something before exhaustion caught him. It is, in the end, not nothing. The venison bones have meat on them. Real meat. Not much, but real. The kind that comes off the bone with a little work. The fish sauce that scrapes from the copper is a half-spoonful for each of you, but it's magnificent. You taste it on the end of your cleaning spoon by accident, the fraction that remains when you're rinsing it, and you stop for a moment because it's so much better than anything you've had access to all day. Not richer, exactly. Just more. More of everything you can taste. Tom sees you stop. Good, isn't it? He says, not as a question. It's... You don't have the words. 27 years, he says, and the scraping of the copper is still one of the best things I eat. Think about what that tells you about a well-made sauce. He doesn't elaborate. You think about it. Miss Partridge appears from the pastry kitchen at 11, looking like someone who has been through something, which she has. The dessert table, which went up at 9:30 and came back down at 10:30 missing most of its contents, meaning 43 people consumed most of a dessert table in 1 hour, which speaks well of the dessert table. She sits on a stool at the prep table with a cup of tea and the expression of someone who has done their best and knows it. The spun sugar survived, she says to no one in particular. I wasn't sure it would. The dining room's quite warm. It looked extraordinary, Peg says. Miss Partridge considers this. It looked as it was supposed to look, she says, which is what I aim for. She looks at you for what is, you're fairly certain, the first time. You cleaned the marble today, she says. The prep marble in the pastry kitchen. Yes, Miss Partridge. It was clean. Thank you. She goes back to her tea. This, you will later understand, is the highest form of praise available from Miss Partridge. It was clean. Thank you. You carry it like a medal. By midnight, the kitchen is something approaching restored. Not perfect. You'll finish the copper tomorrow morning before the day starts. There are things on the shelves that aren't properly organised, things that should be in the cold room that are still on the prep table, things that needed tomorrow morning's attention but can wait until tomorrow morning has actual eyes in it. But the fires are banked, the main mess is addressed, the scullery is as empty as it will be, and the people who've been here since before dawn are taking stock. Mrs. Beale is the last to leave the kitchen. She goes through it the way she goes through it every evening, checking things you're not sure she can actually see in the remaining candlelight. Whether the spit is properly locked, whether the coal scuttle is properly positioned for tomorrow morning, whether the stock pot that's been started for tomorrow has the right things in it. She looks at the copper rack where the pots are all in place, but she'll see tomorrow that they need the second cleaning. She looks at you. Good day, she says. You wait for the qualification, the but. There isn't one. Thank you, Mrs. Beale. She takes her candle and goes up to her room. You sit on the stool at the prep table that Mr. Sims used earlier, the first time you've sat in the kitchen itself rather than in the scullery or on a box in the corner, and you look at the banked fires and the clean pots and the empty range and the kitchen that is, at this hour, all its own, not producing anything, not serving anything, just existing. It smells still of everything that happened today. The venison and the herbs and the cream and the coal and the soap and water and the faint vinegar of the copper cleaning, and underneath all of it, the bass note of a kitchen that has been doing this for 42 years, the smell of accumulated work, the smell of all the dinners that went up those stairs before tonight's went up, all the way back to 1720, all the way back to the first fire lit in this hearth. You are 3 weeks into this. You have 17 hours of work, roughly, ahead of tomorrow. The boy from Hertfordshire, who arrived with a letter from the vicar and a bundle of clothes and no real idea what he was walking into, would not recognise this moment, this specific, tired satisfaction of having done something large and done it without failing. He had ideas about kitchens, about work, about London and its houses and what service in a great house would feel like. He was not wrong exactly, but he was not right either. He imagined effort and hierarchy and difficulty, and those things are here. He didn't imagine the specific quality of learning something skill-shaped and difficult from people who know it inside out, who have distilled decades of understanding into the way their hands move, into the information they hand you, carefully, not easily, but genuinely, over the prep table. He didn't imagine the copper, mirror bright, the seam clean to Mrs. Beale's standard. He didn't imagine the fish sauce on the end of the spoon. He didn't imagine Mary saying again tomorrow and having it mean you'll be here tomorrow and she'll teach you something else. You get up, put the stool back where it goes, bank the range's damper the way Tom showed you, blow out the last candle on the prep table. The kitchen goes dark. The stairs to the basement room are narrow and cold and smell of stone. Your candle throws shadows ahead of you. You can hear Peg's voice somewhere above talking to one of the housemaids, the words indistinct. The sounds of the house settling, the way large buildings do, the creak and shift of structural wood as the temperature drops with the night. Your room is at the end of the basement corridor, past the coal hole and the wood store, and a room whose purpose you haven't established yet. The door is low enough that you have to dip your head. Tom's snoring is already coming through it, which means Tom fell asleep faster than he did even starting later. Your cot is a pallet on a wooden frame, straw mattress, 2 blankets. It is, in absolute terms, not comfortable. In relative terms, after 17 hours of standing and carrying and washing and cleaning in heat, it is exactly right. You lie down without undressing, the way you do most nights, and pull the blankets over you. The candle goes out. Darkness, and the sounds of the house above you. You can hear the aftermath of the dinner, not clearly, and the floors muffle everything, but the shape of it. The guests leaving, the sounds of carriages being called, the front door opened and closed several times, the footman's footsteps on the stone floor 2 levels up. Mr. Harrow's measured voice somewhere in the silver counting that apparently happens after every formal dinner, the reassuring of inventory, the closing of accounts. The Duke of Marlfield upstairs, in whatever drawing room or study he retires to after a dinner with 43 people, is probably doing what men like him do at the end of successful evenings, reviewing it, the conversation, the impressions made and received, whether the food was adequate, whether the wine was right, whether the evening served whatever purpose it was designed to serve, political, social, personal, in the intricate clockwork of relationships and obligations that makes up the world he inhabits. He will not think about the kitchen. This is not, you've decided, a grievance. Not anymore. A grievance implies he owes you something beyond your wages, and wages are what you're here for. Wages and the education contained in this position, and both of those things are being paid. The food gap, what he eats and what you eat, is real and considerable, but it doesn't diminish what you're learning. It doesn't reduce the value of what Mrs. Beale showed you in the way she adjusted that fish sauce at 5:30, the way she saw a problem and solved it and moved on without drama, the way that competence is dignified precisely because it doesn't require acknowledgement to be real. That's something you'll carry forward. You can feel it settling in, the way the kitchen's heat settles into the stone walls and stays there even after the fires are banked. Some understanding of the difference between the work that gets seen and the work that matters, and that the gap between those two things is not a measure of worth. Tom shifts in the next cot. The snoring stops briefly, then resumes. Outside in the city, it's past midnight. London's second shift is in progress. The thieves and the watchmen and the link boys and the gin shops and the people who do their living in the dark. A whole parallel city that runs beneath the one you work in during daylight. Somewhere up on Grosvenor Square, the last carriages are being waved away, the street lamps making yellow circles on the wet pavement. The horse's breath visible in the October cold. You won't see any of that tonight. You close your eyes, your hands ache. The knuckles specifically, that dry hot oik of skin that's been abraded and re-wet too many times. You flex them against the blanket. The ache persists, but it's manageable. It's become the normal state of your hands, and the normal state of your hands is telling you something about the work you're doing, about the physical reality of it, about what it costs a body to do this day after day after day. You don't mind it. That's what surprises you lying here. You thought you'd mind it more. The straw mattress presses up against your back in a way that's become familiar. The specific topography of this particular sleeping surface, the lumps and dips of it, that your body has mapped and learned to accommodate. Not comfortable in any hotel sense of the word, but yours. A place that is yours in the small but real way that a scullion's cot in a great house basement is yours. You sleep here, you leave it each morning, you return to it each night, and it holds the fact of your presence, and presence matters. Your first week here, you cried twice, both times after everyone else was asleep, face in the rough blanket. The specific homesickness of being 15 in a strange city with nothing familiar, not the sounds or the smells or the faces, missing your mother's kitchen, not the food exactly, but the kitchen itself, the smallness of it, the way the fire sounded different in that hearth, the fact that the darkness there was a different darkness, one you'd grown up in. You don't cry now, haven't, in a while. The city got into you somewhere between week 2 and week 3. You stopped flinching at the noise. The hierarchy stopped feeling like threat and started feeling like structure. The work stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling like the shape of your days, which is different. Structure can be shelter. Structure is what Mrs. Beale runs her kitchen on, and what Mr. Sims brings to his spit, and what Mary brings to her sauce making, and it's not comfortable exactly, but it's reliable, and reliable is its own kind of comfort. Your mind drifts. You think about the fish sauce again, for the last time tonight, the fraction of it on the spoon, the way it tasted, that concentrated, complex, layered thing, and what Tom said about 27 years of scraping copper and that still being one of the best things he eats. That's not tragedy, you think. Or not only tragedy, it's also a testament to what Mrs. Beale makes, that even the residue of it is extraordinary, that the work is of a quality that survives its own consumption, leaves evidence of its excellence even in the cleaning. You want to make something like that some day. Not the same thing. Something of the same quality. Something with that kind of seriousness is the wrong word, but something in the neighbourhood of seriousness. The deliberateness of someone who knows what they're making and makes it exactly so. Not because anyone will notice, but because the thing being made deserves to be made right. Mrs. Beale's kitchen is like that. Everything in it is like that. You don't know yet if you'll stay. Not in this specific place. You're here for the term of your position, which is as long as Mrs. Beale wants you, which is apparently longer than 11 days, which is something. But in this, in kitchens, in the work, in the particular world of below stairs, of fire and copper, and the serious production of food, you don't know yet if this is the thing, or if it's the beginning of the path to the thing, or if it's just what you're doing right now while you figure out what the thing is. You're 15. You can give yourself the right not to know yet. The sounds of the house above begin to fade as it properly settles into night. No more footsteps, no more carriages, just the building's own sounds, its settling, and Tom's steady breathing, and through it all the very distant, very constant presence of London, the city that never entirely sleeps, the city that is always producing something, always in motion, always putting something on a table somewhere for someone, and always running on the invisible labour of the people below it. October 1762. The Duke of Marfield dined this evening on the work of your hands and the hands of the people around you. He ate well. He doesn't know your name. And somewhere in between those two facts is the whole story of the world you're learning to live in. That essential things are done by invisible people, that invisibility is not the same as insignificance, that the copper you cleaned 3 times is still gleaming in the dark kitchen above you, and that Mary said again tomorrow, you'll be ready. The church bells somewhere above ground, somewhere in the London night, strike 1 o'clock, and the sound of them comes down through the stone and the floors and the accumulated silence of the building, arriving at you faint and steady. 1 in the morning, 4 hours and 30 minutes until you light the fires again. Your eyes are already closed. Let the kitchen wait. Let the copper wait. Let the prep table and the coal scuttle and the speaking tube and Mr. Harrow's voice and the pots, always the pots, let them all wait for 3:30. Right now there's just this. Your cot, your blankets, the weight of the day releasing itself from your muscles in the slow, specific way that exhaustion has when it's clean and earned, when you've been all the way to the bottom of a hard day and come back up with something you didn't have when you went in. The tiredness is total. It comes over you the way water rises when you're very still. From your hands first, the ache going softer, going distant, receding from something sharp and immediate to something merely there, like a sound heard from another room. Your hands that cleaned copper and carried coal and turned birds on a spit, and finally, just before midnight, held a piece of bread that tasted better than anything that went upstairs tonight. Those hands are resting now, the knuckles that cracked, and the palms that roughened and the fingers that learned today the beginning of trussing a pheasant from Mary. Your arms, the long ache from carrying, from the repeated lift and lower of the coal scuttle, the copper pot, the roasting tin. The muscles you didn't know you had until 3 weeks ago, that are taking shape in ways you can feel when you stretch. A new solidity in the forearms that wasn't there before, and that will keep becoming more itself through the months ahead. Your back. That's the last to go. Always. The low ache from standing on stone floors for 17 hours, from bending over the scullery sink, from the particular stoop you adopt over the cleaning work. It releases slowly, like a knot that takes a certain amount of patience to work loose, the tension leaving in layers, each one a degree of peace you didn't have a moment ago. The sounds of Tom breathing, the distant underground sound of water moving somewhere in the pipes, the October cold on the edges of the room where the blankets don't reach. Your body settling. You came from a place where the fields went to the horizon in every direction, and the village was 900 people, and you knew all their faces, and the sounds at night were wind and animals, and the particular silence of flat land that has nothing to stop or redirect the dark. You have been placed inside the largest human machine in the world, and it has been swallowing you alive in small pieces since the 14th of September, and you have not been swallowed. You are still here. You are still here, and tomorrow Mary will show you something else, and the day after that Mrs. Beale will say your name at least once, and the day after that the copper rack will be so clean it won't need touching, and at some point, you don't know when, it won't announce itself. This city will shift from being a thing that happens to you to a thing you are part of, and below stairs will stop feeling like reduction and start feeling like ground, the actual ground of things, the foundation from which everything else rises, the fire that makes the food possible, the clean pot that carries the sauce, the invisible load-bearing essential work. Or maybe that's already happening. You're too tired to be certain. The bells, if there are more bells, don't reach you now. Just the breathing and the dark and the blanket and the slow, complete claim of sleep. You've been here 3 weeks. You'll be here in the morning, and the morning will be cold and dark, and the fires won't be lit yet, and you'll light them, the way you've learned to light them, the newspaper twisted just so, and the kindling placed just so, and the coal not too much at the start, or you'll smother it. And Mrs. Beale will arrive at 5:30 with her knives, and her 32 years, and her one-word evaluations, and the kitchen will begin. The kitchen is always beginning. That's the thing about kitchens, about this kind of work, about the thing that happens below stairs while the world above is doing what the world above does. It begins again, every morning the same foundation, every morning the fires and the water and the copper and the work. It began long before you arrived. It will go on long after you're gone. Right now, for these hours, you're part of it. That's enough. That's more than enough. Your breathing deepens. The kitchen is dark and clean above you. The Duke sleeps in his rooms. The fires wait. Centuries from now, someone will stand on this street and look up at the building and see stone and glass and whatever the city has become around it, and they won't know about the kitchen, about the fires, about the scullion whose name wasn't recorded in any document anyone kept. They won't know about the copper or the fish sauce or the 17 hours or the bread at 9 o'clock that tasted like everything. They won't know about you. But you were here. Your hands made things possible. Your fires kept the kitchen warm. The food that went upstairs tonight, the 43 dinners, the 14 courses, the consommé that took Mary 4 hours and arrived at the table perfectly clear and golden. That food was carried on the foundation of your work, the pots you cleaned and the water you heated and the coal you carried before anyone else was awake. The world runs on that. It always has. It always will. Some things don't change across all the centuries. The work that makes the feast possible, the people who do it, down in the basement, in the heat, before dawn. The gap between what they eat and what they serve, and underneath all of it, the thing that makes it endurable, that makes it more than endurable, the learning. The craft coming into your hands slowly, the way calluses form, the way skill accumulates without announcing itself, until one day you pick up something that was difficult and it isn't anymore, and you understand that you've been changed by the work without the work asking permission. You'll be changed, are already being changed. Right now it just feels like sleep, so let it be sleep. Let the October dark have you. Let the city above do what it does. The night city. The city of watchmen and gin shops and link boys with their torches and carts being loaded for tomorrow morning's deliveries. The whole enormous machinery of London doing what it does in the hours when kitchens rest. Let your hands rest. Let the copper be copper. Let tomorrow come when it comes at 3:30. With the bells and the cold be carried. You've earned these hours. Take them all the way down, deeper. The sounds getting softer, the darkness getting warmer. The day releasing you, finally, completely, the last of it letting go. Down here in the dark, in the stone basement of a great house in London in 1762. A 15-year-old boy from Hertfordshire closes his eyes on the world he's learning to inhabit, and the kitchen waits, and the fires sleep, and the city turns slowly above, and the night holds everything in its enormous indifferent dark. Good night.